So you need to understand how to manage your capital when you get it in.
Welcome to the BIG5D Podcast, featuring engaging conversations about tech and business in Africa. This episode of the BIG5D Podcast is supported by Inspire, a Cape Town digital agency specializing in paid media and SEO. It's time to cut the bull and be inspired. Please visit them at inspire.co.za. That's Inspire spelled NSPYRE. Welcome to episode 56 of the BIG5D Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Laughlin, Chief Content Officer of Big5 Digital. Today's guest is Keshni Morar. She's an investor, the founder of multiple businesses, and an advisor to tech founders through her work as MD South Africa for the Founder Institute. We have long wanted Keshni to join us as a guest on this show. However, we reached out in the past week after reading something Keshni wrote on LinkedIn that really grabbed our attention. It was a searing take on how founders need to treat the money they raise from investors in a more responsible way. Citing an unnamed example, Keshni shared a litany of what founding teams should not do with $1 million. Here is just a little bit of what she wrote under the hashtag #StartupTruth. $1 million in funding doesn't make you rich. It makes you responsible. I just watched another founder blow through $100,000 in 2 months, like a lottery winner at a Ferrari dealership. Premium office in the startup district. Full stack dev team hired instantly. Swag budget that'd make Google blush. And here's the killer. Team building trip to Bali. After reading that, my first question was, of course, just how big is Google's swag budget? And my second question was, how much actual team building took place in Bali? Any rate, kidding aside, we thought this LinkedIn truth bomb of Keshni's was a great launch pad for a conversation about startup fundraising in Africa. While we're not alone in being interested in startup fundraising in Africa, we are alone in having a guest as qualified to opine on the subject as Keshni Morar. Keshni, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's such a
Great to
pleasure.
have you. You and I, we've talked a few times about getting you on, and it hasn't happened. But now we've got you because, I saw this thing on LinkedIn that I want to ask you about in a minute. But before we do that, just tell us, for those who don't know you in our audience, tell us who you are, kind of what you're, what you spend your time doing and who you represent.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm an ex-corporate junkie, proud ex-corporate junkie, jumped in, became a founder myself, fast forwarded into venture building, investing early stage startups. Um, and currently, I'm very active in the startup ecosystem here in South Africa and actually globally. So I'm with Founder Institute. I'm the MD of Founder Institute in South Africa. But we attract founders from all over the world that come and complete our accelerator for 14 weeks. And so that's exciting. I'm with Josie Angels. So I'm an active angel investor through Josie Angels as well, where we invest in early stage businesses. And then I'm also the founder of Investable, which is those founders that are beyond the seed stage looking to actually scale their businesses, understanding the different levers they can pull, help them do that. So we have that consulting arm as well. But other than that, I do wear a lot of hats in the ecosystem. So you may find me show up in different ways.
If you were to give yourself one label, would that label be venture builder, or what label would you give yourself? I hate to challenge you to do that, but
I would go venture builder.
okay,
That's the one passion I absolutely have. Yeah.
okay. And a venture builder, are you spending your time teaching startup founders? I would assume mostly how to make themselves investable, or what is the one thing you try to impart to a founder in the course of being a venture builder?
So there's not just one thing. I think it depends on
Probably
where the founder is, where the business is, and we look at the idea stage. I want them to get to market. I want them to validate their ideas, make sure that the problem that they're solving is the right problem to be solved, and people are actually going to pay them. Because if somebody's not paying you and you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart, I mean, you're just a charity. So if you're not planning to build a strong business, that's okay. That's
yeah.
absolutely okay. Later on, as you grow, are you at the right stage to scale? what are the systems processes you need in place to actually enable that. So it's quite difficult going from the one stage to the next, and having experience in
Yeah.
almost all the different stages, I can play a critical role in each of those to help people grow.
Yeah. So what prompted me to reach out last week and say, "Oh, I really want to talk to Keshni as soon as possible," was this post I saw on LinkedIn. You write them under. I think the hashtag is now I've forgotten, but startup life, something like that. It's not that,
Yes,
but it was a different
startup
hashtag.
truth.
But
It's
it's
the
just
startup truth.
startup truth. Right. Sorry. Thank you. Um, and you're doing. I guess it appears to be a series. I don't. I guess sort of informally, but it's a series of posts under that hashtag that I've been noticing. I noticed a few recently that caught my attention. The one that really caught my attention was you told the story of an unnamed uh, company, which again we don't have to get into the name unless you want to blurt it out. Then I won't
Nope.
stop you, but I'm not going to ask you to do that. The company said took $1 million and immediately turned it into $200,000 or something like that, and it struck me one as funny because a couple of details were I'm sorry amusing, and also just really kind of poignant. I don't know if that's the right word, but said something about a certain culture or a certain something that's missing in the understanding of a lot of founders. And I just wanted to talk to you about it. And I'll just summarize a couple of the points in there. It was took $1 million, he raised $1 million. I don't know if that was a seed round or what that was, and bought leased premium office space. The one that really got me was the team building trip to Bali. I mean, that just had me like, really? Oh my god! And then you said like a massive swag budget, which is also amusing, in a sort of dark sort of way. And I think the term the phrasing you used was a swag budget that rivaled Google's or that would make Google blush or
I was
something like that.
exaggerating a bit, but it felt like that.
I assume that was an exaggeration. I don't believe. I assume that the Bali trip was real. Is that real?
Yeah, well, it
Or
a
if it's
holiday
not,
trip,
don't say
an
so.
island
Let's just
trip, an
pretend it is.
island trip. No, an island trip was real.
Okay.
It
Oh
was
boy.
wellness, founder wellness.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because I had a uh, VC on uh, show recently who talked about founder wellness, but it wasn't in the context of uh, team
Taking trips
building
to
trips
Bali.
to Bali. But the bigger point was they blew through that money in crazy, silly ways. And that is not how a founder should treat $1 million. And the point
Yeah.
was, it's not your money.
Mhm.
It's not fun money. It's you're not showing up in a Ferrari dealership. I think that's another term you use. With notes pouring out of your pocket, ready to buy a Ferrari. So,
Yeah.
um, I guess I wanted to talk to you about the bigger implications of what you're writing. You kind of made it sound like you see this too often. Is that right? This sort
It
of
is
thing.
so true. Like, so I deal with a lot of founders, not just in the tech space, but also in the traditional brick and mortar space, where they
Mhm.
raise funding, whether it's through corporates, it's through everywhere else. So let me say, with that founder, it's almost like it happened a while back. It didn't actually happen now recently. It was just something that was irritating me so much over the years. Like, people come to me, we want to raise money, we want to raise money, we need a funder, and then you get into it and it's like there's nothing of substance that you can actually help raise them, help with them with the raise. And the founder that I'd gone through is you know they they went through this emotional stress and everything else, and decided to take a wellness trip for themselves. But that's not a business expense per se. You're taking your
It's a
time
personal
out.
expense. Yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah.
personal expense, you know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? So you need to understand how to manage your capital when you get it in. It's like lottos. I always like, in 2020, 2021, when you saw all this hype going on, people were going a little bit berserk, and I was very confused, right? Because I was getting approached in my startup from investors, and I was like, I can't take your money because I don't know how I'm going to give you a return. Like, I need to know how can I leverage your network to get to where I need to be, so that I can actually utilize your money in the best way possible to give you a
Mhm.
return. And I just see that lacking in so many people. They take it as, we need to raise money, this is what we think, we got 20% to marketing, 10% here. And I'm like, that's not sufficient, that's not capital allocation. I want to understand, when I get into a DD, where are you putting the money, how are you going to utilize it? doesn't have to be 100%. But it has to be stress tested. It has to come with some thought process that shows me you know how to allocate the capital, and you know how long that capital is going to last. So it's not just about a
Right.
runway for them,
Right.
understanding what goes behind it that's going to grow it.
Yeah. Well, I think also in the same post, I think you shared some kind of comical KPIs, like I think it was prestige per square foot of office space or something like that.
Yeah,
Which
I
again,
try to find the humor
yeah,
in
I
it.
would say was amusing, but also it's like, you know, is there, and that's kind of what when I said culture, and I don't mean to say that all startups have the same culture, but there is that sort of culture of we need to show what we've raised. We need to sort of
Mm,
somehow demonstrate that
yeah,
we have raised money. And one way to do it is to have a cool office. Another way to do it is to
yeah,
name
yeah.
the other things people waste swag, having a lot of swag, all that stuff doesn't make the product go to market faster, doesn't, increase your sales, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
What is behind that culture that makes people behave that way? I'm not saying every startup does. Most probably don't. The ones that succeed certainly don't. I would assume. Where does that come from?
I think that comes mainly from Silicon Valley. So you
Okay.
get this
Okay.
when I see stuff like that, I get WeWork vibes, right? you know, just big parties, and I'm like,
Yeah.
there's something that in me that just starts turning when I see that,
Yeah.
right? And so you do see it, and you see it quite often. So when you go to like I've been to places in Cape Town where people want beachfront offices and they want the mountain view, and I'm like,
Right.
is that gonna? I understand
Which
it's
in Cape Town
aesthetically
isn't hard to get. Almost every window has a. But no, I got
mountain view, right? But you like, I get you want aesthetically pleasing. I get it. Like
you.
psychologically, it does have an impact on you, but you got to be practical, especially at the stages you're at. If you somebody who has to entertain clients and you need to meet clients, and in the SaaS space you generally don't, and you need them coming to an office, then yes, get the office space. Make it
Mhm.
presentable. If you've got a large team that has to work together on a hourly basis, like you have to be face to face, get a nice office space. People want to work in comfortable spaces, and so
Uh-huh.
that is not an issue. But when you can have a fully remote business, where you can meet up with people in your team at a coffee shop, at a
Right.
restaurant, have a nice conversation over lunch. You can still do away with a lot of these large expenses that you're sitting with, not for 1 month or 2 months, because these leases go on for 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be cognizant of how that impacts your runway. How does it impact your planning for what you actually trying to do with your product? And this is why every person that comes through like Founder Institute, the first thing, they don't want to enroll because they want to know, if they won't enroll if they don't get funding from it. And I'm like, but you're losing the point of Founder Institute. It's actually helping you build a business not reliant on funding to start with. And so you come in, you learn the core aspects of building the foundations of your business.
Mhm.
And the one thing is, revenue is king. Look for your customers first before you go look for your investor, because the investors will come when they see the customers roll in.
Right. So, in generally speaking, the more successful companies you work with don't necessarily need the money. I'm putting words in your mouth. I apologize. They don't
No.
necessarily need the money at the point because they've already got customers. They're already making sales,
Yes.
but the money will help them do what they want to do faster, bigger, whatever.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Because then you've got a scaling plan, right? And if you've got a scaling plan, I always tell, this is the one thing I always tell founders: when you raise when you want to scale, when you validated what you need to do, and you have a plan on how to make this robust enough so that when you in the ingredient called money, when you insert that, it just makes things bake a lot faster.
Right.
And it gives rise to something quicker versus taking the long road and you know getting at it at just through one revenue of funding.
Right. Right. Right.
It's a booster.
Yeah. I've heard it described as like, you need to be at the point where you're acquiring customers at an increasingly lower cost per customer, or there's certain metrics that need to be sort of chugging along before inserting capital makes sense.
Yeah,
And do you even see pre-revenue raises anymore? I mean, does
I
that
do.
even
I
happen?
do. So there are
Uh,
industries where you do see pre-revenue raises, mainly in the health tech space, where it's like highly
okay.
compliant on FDA approval and so forth. In certain instances where you'll see an early stage raise is if an investor comes in, and I've had this in my cohorts, where it's pre-revenue, but the idea is brilliant. The investor that I brought in to meet the founder sees what they're doing and realizes they can connect them with one or two big customers that could
Okay.
actually push the revenue up almost instantly, get them into EBITDA positive, and so they insert funding so that they can get part of that upside. And
So they could do the
so,
things that they need to do to get that customer and serve that
correct,
customer. Right, right.
yes,
Okay, but it's much more rare than it used to be. Is that fair?
yes, yeah. So
Okay.
people are going back to fundamentals. There's
Yeah,
this
yeah.
euphoria of
Well, I mean, we've been hearing that for a while, which is,
yeah,
you know, you got
well,
to
yeah,
show up with customers. You got to show up with a proven, product market fit. It already has to be established, or essentially, all that. These are
or
not
clear
new.
pathways to it.
Yeah, these are not new observations
Yeah,
necessarily. That the environment's different now, and it's much more rigorous. Which
yes.
you know, which when I read your post about the Ferraris and the Bali trip, makes sense that maybe that's not the newest example. How do you mind if I ask how far is that so far in the rearview mirror that it was a different era of fundraising? By
No,
that
it
I mean a
was
few years.
so that
Hmm.
wasn't too long ago. It was a
Okay.
couple of years ago. And
Uh-huh.
so, like, there was this euphoria of people pushing money into the business because of who was already invested. So, when you
Yeah.
say what does it signal? I think you asked me this earlier in terms of what does it say, right? when
Yeah.
when somebody's raised funding and they looked at who's on the cap table, you generally have people that will follow to say, if this person's on the cap table, they know what they're doing, so I want to get in, because then the FOMO kicks in, right?
Yeah.
But if you're putting money into a founder that can just tell a good story and doesn't know how to manage money, you're in big trouble. And I've had a number of founders that know how to tell a very, very good story. And I've
And
invested
that's
in
an
one or two
important
of those
piece. It
companies.
is an important piece, right? But it's not
But
everything.
you must also
It's
have
not
to
the whole thing.
deliver. But you
Yeah.
must
Yeah.
also be able to deliver. So, you know, that mentality doesn't work.
So what I am curious about, and maybe it can be in this case, or maybe you can share a different example. But when you see this, Bali trip Ferrari dealership mentality and behavior is more important, I think. What is the remediation that takes place, or is it as, and how does it get to that point? I mean, aren't these aren't these founders being monitored more closely by the people putting money in the business, and that gets into micromanagement versus letting people build their own companies. But what are your thoughts on how to prevent that as an investor when you see, oh my God, they're all going to Bali next week? Are we paying for that?
So the investors in my little pool will pipe up and say, "Are you nuts? Like,
Yeah.
what's going
Okay.
on?" Right?
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
going, but generally, it really does depend on like what is the stake you're taking in the business. That will
Right.
translate to kind of how much, not control, but how much say you have. Do you have a board seat in that business,
Yeah.
or are
Fair
you
enough.
just like part of a consortium that has invested into the business and you're a very small percentage of that with really no say, right? So you got to be clear about those sorts of things as an investor. But generally, like in this case, the investor stepped up and said, listen, stop now, you need to do X, Y, and Z, what's the plan, etc. And it went down to the sales cycles. What do the sales cycles look like, clarifying the whole what is the sales process the person was following, to make sure that she was doing the right thing, right? And so it was, getting through and getting your hands dirty as an investor to help them figure out where they're going wrong, and stopping the hemorrhaging of this cash flow going out,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're just not allocating properly. So it's not just one thing, it's a number of things that get looked at.
And what happened? What was the outcome in this case?
So the business had to pivot. There was no doubt about it. The CEO had to be changed. So the founder had to find somebody to replace them. And the business, the product was a good product. It was a brilliant product.
Thank
It
goodness.
was, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's a very good product, and it's something that could definitely scale globally, but it takes the right type of person to scale that. And the founder at that stage was just not into sales. And you'll find most founders hate sales, absolutely hate sales.
But
But
they have to be the primary salesperson early on, right?
right, exactly. And that's
Hmm.
why, you hide behind certain facades and kind of narratives. But when it comes down to it, your investors will get very involved if you mismanaging money. So as a founder, you need to be clear about the fact that now you've got people you report to. You
Yeah,
you you owe them something.
yeah, yeah. Which leads me to another conversation I had with a venture capitalist a while ago about, and I've seen a lot written about this, about, um, a founder often thinks they're going to, scale up and become massively wealthy, but sometimes the exits aren't that lucrative for founders, particularly if they raise money very early on and that sort of thing. What kind of expectation setting do you think needs to happen with founders about the amount of wealth they're going to create? And is there a disconnect between reality and perception that probably used to be quite dramatic? I don't know if it's still as big an issue. Talk about that for a moment.
So working with founders over the years, the one thing I've realized is many of them don't understand what fundraising is about. They don't realize that when they start the first fundraise, they're on this hamster wheel that has to go on and on and on, and they need to they're going to end up continuously raising because your investors are, one, looking for exit, two, you actually need a team in place to continue running the business while you as the founder go and find the money to pay your team to run the business, right?
Mhm.
And with that in mind, when they start this, they don't plan like ahead. Where are the inflection points? They're not thinking 3 5 years ahead, and we're not saying that has to be cast in stone. Your 5 year plan probably changes maybe in 6 months, right? Depending on what
Yeah,
happens in the market, what happens in your life, things, events come to bear, and your plans will change, and we expect that. But you do need forward thinking, and you don't need foresight, you just need forward thinking, to be honest. Understanding, in terms of South Africa, what's happening in the country, how are the politics going to affect what I'm doing. Do we have uh, elections in a year from now? In those elections, if the ANC is no longer in play and the DA comes in, what does that mean? You play scenarios out, and founders don't generally know how to. I can tell you, a lot of people, whether you founders or in corporate, many people don't do that. They don't play the scenarios out. And so that becomes quite a sticky point, because we can all have this wonderful view of, I'm going to exit at 50 billion rand or $50 billion or whatever. But
that's a big
every
exit.
step you take, yes, if you want that exit, what are all the things behind that you've planned to do to get to that, and what are the different scenarios that could play out that could affect that? And so that's how your planning actually takes place. So, and your capital allocation as well, because if you're looking for specific exits, what are the things that are going to drive those exits?
Right.
And for each business, it may be different.
And what is, am I diluted out completely by the time we do exit? Not completely, but
Yep.
that's another. I read an example somewhere. A founder who,
No, no.
10 years in, came out with $1 million at the end of a 10 year, 24/7, just, you know, bleeding, for the business.
Hmm.
And the exit was rather unimpressive because they had raised so much money, and they just, I don't know how to prevent that, or how a founder prevents that. I suppose, you know, being
Forward
smart
planning.
about their capital. Yeah.
Well, it's not just about being smart about the capital. So when you're forward planning and you know when you're raising, at what
Yeah.
intervals, you need to actually simulate that onto your cap table. So
Right.
it's an in-depth exercise, but it is something that most founders don't actually fundamentally understand. So when they go out fundraising, the other issue that a lot of founders have is that they don't bring on the right people. So they don't bring on somebody who can give them advice on how to fundraise. when they come to their valuations, they over bloat it. They take things that they watch on YouTube or whatever and try and retrofit it. It doesn't always work. They don't have, like, in terms of tax consult, I've been in DDs where I saw really, really scary things when it came to taxes. Like, and this is just because it wasn't tax, like, people were trying to evade tax. They just didn't know they were supposed to do something, and they ended up evading tax out of naivety, right? Which is
It can get you into
serious.
some
It's a
trouble.
serious
Yeah, yeah.
problem. Yes.
Uh-huh.
So, in the same way, your cap tables need to be forecasted based on how you're going to fundraise. And if you only know how you're going to fundraise and what you're going to fundraise for, if you know your path, your roadmap to the, in terms of the development of your business. So it is difficult. It's not something that is a back of a napkin calculation.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears, maybe talk more broadly about the ecosystem in Africa. And I'm going to cite another LinkedIn post of yours as under the same hashtag, I believe. And it was about this recent story around Okra, which is the Nigerian fintech that recently shut down, returned some of the money it raised to investors. I believe it raised 16.5 million. I read somewhere that it's returned 4 to 5 million to their. I don't know what the exact number is. That's something I just read. I don't know how true it was. But there was a discussion that, well, you kind of reposted and wrote a little essay on top of someone else's post where they said Okra was killed by the ecosystem tax, essentially. I mean, I don't know if that's the right way to put it. And you argued that the ecosystem tax should be priced into the, correct me if I'm interpreting this wrong, should be
Yep.
kind of priced into the equation of
Yep.
building. And talk about, first of all, when we say the ecosystem tax, what are we talking about? And kind of, and it seems like a uniquely African issue, or maybe not uniquely African, perhaps uniquely emerging market. But talk about that a little bit. Why that's important to have that in mind as you're building.
So we can come up with the most weird and wonderful ways to do things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's break it down to simple stuff. If you are building a train, if you don't
Mm-hmm.
have the tracks to run that train is going to sit and do nothing and
You have to
collect
build the
dust.
track. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. So the
uh,
ecosystem, if the ecosystem and the governments and the whoever is responsible for the infrastructure doesn't build the infrastructure, how are you going to run your train, right? And if you are the person that's new to all of this, you're going to end up building that infrastructure to run the train, right? So that's the ecosystem tax. Are you now saying, I've got this brand new thing, but in order for it to work, I need to now build the entire solution end to end so that it can work efficiently,
right.
right? And then you can obviously take on the belts and braces on how you're going to monetize this, etc., etc. But all those things, if you don't have the banks in play to make sure transfers can be done, you are dealing with cash. Like, all those little nitty gritties end up accumulating over a period of time, and you need to understand, where do you have leeway, where something exists, you build on top of it, versus I need to build in order to get to where I need to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the ecosystem tax for me, right? And that's how I've interpreted.
Right.
In terms
Yeah,
of
and
my
another
role,
part of that there was. I'm sorry. Another part of that that was cited was upskilling, having a team that has the skills that you need, and often having to train them because those skills aren't existent in the market. It's all those things that maybe in a more developed market would already be there, and it's already been paid for by by those who came before you, I suppose. And but here you're building as it's like flying the plane, building the plane as you fly it, sort of thing,
flying a
or whatever
kite.
that metaphor. And but so on the one hand, someone is sort of saying this killed the business, and you're saying the business should have kind of, well, maybe again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you seem to be saying they should have understood that, and that should have been part of how they organized the business, how they understood what their costs really would be, etc. Is that fair?
I would say that's a pretty fair assumption, but
Okay.
because I don't know, like, the integral parts of Okra, what actually happened,
Well,
like,
I know you're
everything
not
is
an
based
investor,
on
and then let's
what's
be clear
out
about
there.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's what you hear in the markets, right? So you can make certain deductions from that. If you
Yeah.
moved from a very, very well established a fintech business, now you're going into hardware, infrastructure, servers, etc. You're competing against giants like Amazon and those guys who can come in and
Right.
literally wipe you out. Like they
Right.
can MTN went in and put in their own data warehouses, right?
Well,
So
yeah,
you
that
have
was
these massive competitors coming in. You need to also account for how quickly can a competitor take you out, or even a
right.
collaborator, right? Because
Right.
there's nothing that stops Apple or Facebook or anybody else from really replicating what you do overnight, because they have the resources and they have the access and they control the access, right?
Hmm.
So you need to understand those sorts of things and understand how does that impact you. Goes back to scenario building, right? If you understand the scenarios, how do you change and react quick enough so you don't die?
So we have a few minutes left. The one quite sort of building a little bit on what we just talked about, and forget Okra as an example, just broadly speaking, when a startup winds down, whether they return money or not is sort of irrelevant to this point. When a startup winds down and doesn't succeed, are there two or three most common reasons why that happens? I know every startup's different, journey is different, every sector is different, and so on and so on. But are there commonalities when you see that happening? You're like, oh yeah, they must have X, Y, and Z, or is it different every time?
It's kind of different every time, but I think a lot of it is they run out of money. That was the
Well,
first one.
sure,
uh,
but there's a reason
they
you
do
run out
run
of
out of
money
money.
because you haven't done certain things
Yes,
to make more money come in before that happens, right? So,
exactly. And then
I,
it's like it's not an endless pit where like investors are going to keep on throwing money in. They're going to get to
right.
a point where it's like, well, make it, figure it out and pivot or do whatever you need to do and change and fix it, or they just give up, right? Some of them just give up, and
So,
I
is
don't know
it
if that's
when
a
that
valid
happens? Is
way
it
to.
investors giving up, or is it the team giving up in most cases, or is it both? Mm,
It could be a combination. Look, it could be a
mhm,
combination of it. And generally, people would give up when they see no hope in moving this business forward. And
mhm,
in those instances, you want to sit back and say, what? How can we salvage the business? How can we take what IP is there, because that IP is going to get stale, and it's going to get stale quickly, right? As
mhm.
technology moves faster, if you've got code, that code is going to get stale very very quickly, and to have that redeveloped could end up being a lot costlier. So you may want to find somebody you can exit to very quickly from that perspective. So sell off the IP, sell off whatever assets you have, and minimize that cost to the investor and to the business, in just letting go. But for me, I think most of it is just they cannot keep pushing, and it's just not a viable business. That's what it comes down to, because nobody gives
Okay,
up a viable business.
fair enough. Fair enough. An investor, somebody will come in and change the team. Something will happen to keep it going, right? If it's viable. Okay.
Yes.
Now, last question is, I don't, I didn't want to ask a lot of AI questions because that can get a little tedious, But one thing I want to ask everybody who's in a position to answer the question is, how is that changing how companies are being built? I forget about building an AI solution, rather using AI to build. I think that's a.
Hmm.
I ask everyone that, and everyone seems to think it's going to. No one has a. I haven't had a really concise answer to that question yet, surprisingly. But what do you think
I
the
think
impact will
we
be?
we're still in the exploratory stages. There's so many
Uh-huh.
things you can do with AI. I started with AI in 2017. Everybody would, like, I was literally no man's land in South Africa trying to find people to help me use AI and machine learning, and I was trial and error. Fast forward to post COVID, and now it's accessible by everybody. I feel like a real dum dum, to be very honest, because what took me 3 years to build, I can build over a weekend now. So you can
Uh-huh.
see the difference. Like, I was assisting another founder, raise capital, and she had a health tech platform, fully interoperable. It was actually it was one of the closest ones that most people could get to. It was so good that the NHS in New Zealand had acquired it, right? And so with that platform, it took her 4 years to build just the basic fundamental building blocks of that business, of that, not the business, of the platform itself. When AI started to flourish, it was about 2 months ago we touched base, And she told me she rebuilt that entire system over a weekend
That's
using
amazing.
AI.
That's incredible. Yeah.
Right, and so you can see the way you can use AI to transform your business is amazing. So whether you're a brick and mortar company or you're a tech business, how you utilize AI is going to be absolutely important. And I think what we're going to struggle with is, it's not that people are going to be replaced by AI, it's they're going to reduce the number of relevant jobs. That's what's going to happen.
Right.
So I don't know who said it. It's not AI that's going to replace people. It's people using AI will
Yeah, no,
replace
I've
people.
heard that one a lot, and I think that's true. But that also means AI is a force multiplier, which means you need a smaller team,
Correct.
right?
Correct. You
And
will have
yeah,
smaller teams. Yeah.
but I've always thought it's a unique opportunity for Africa because of what we were just talking about with the ecosystem tax and how part of that is you have to train up,
Mm.
the skill set of your dev team, et cetera, or someone has to. And a lot of that is sort of bypassed by using AI, isn't it? So I just see it
I
as
think
like
for
a uniquely. Go ahead,
no, go for
please.
it.
No. I was just going to say
Oh,
I
okay.
believe it's a uniquely good opportunity for builders in emerging markets, Africa, or whatever,
Mm.
who may not have the resources to build a team, or may not have any resources, but they have access to AI, and
Mhm.
they can, to the point of your friend who rebuilt her platform over the weekend. Somebody could build a new platform over a weekend that they used to not have any ability to do because they had no resources.
Yep.
I feel like
Yep.
that. I'm just wondering when we're going to see that what I just described, manifest itself in new companies with one or two founders that have built something amazing using AI over the weekend. And when are we going to see that, or are we seeing it already?
You actually are seeing it. I actually have a founder who had two developers on her team. They made an
Okay.
absolute mess of her MVP. I told her, go and use Lovable, figure it out, do the super base thing. She did it. She ended up learning how to vibe code. She did that. She got an MVP out. She's testing it. Now, the vibe coding stuff is not scalable. So that's the first thing we need to know, is that these kinds of apps that you're using, that you developing with vibe coding and AI and all of that, you got to understand whether it is scalable or not. So every person's going to have some sort of knowledge or learn some sort of knowledge around coding.
So you
You're not going to
can't
get
just
away with
not know what it
just
is and just
totally.
use vibe coding. Yeah. Is
Yeah,
that why it's
yeah.
not scalable? Because you need that understanding of what you've built, essentially.
We're still figuring it out. That's why,
Yeah.
because we don't know the codes of line the lines of code that it's building out. You still need to vet it. You still need to understand where it's going wrong, why it's not giving you the right answers. And people are relying too much on AI to give them the right answers. And this is where, when somebody's over reliant on chat, for example, chat GPT
Right.
or Grok or wherever, they don't validate like what the answers are coming out of that, right?
Right.
And they're unable to,
Right.
because they just don't know.
Well, it's like what I do. I mean, I'm a writer, and I don't really use AI to write, but if I did, I mean, I don't, because I enjoy the sound of my own voice. But if I did use it, and you can't just hit send after you have AI create something for you. You have to vet it, make sure the facts aren't made up, and you have to make sure it's in a
Yep,
voice that you would stand behind. And you have to check it line by line. And now with code, that's just a more complicated version of the same thing, right? You,
yep, yep, 100%.
Final thought: what is so? I think African VCs have raised about 1.5 billion. No, I'm sorry. African startups have raised from VCs about 1.5 billion so far this year, which is at a pretty good pace. What is your just general sense of how the African tech ecosystem is doing? Is it making progress? What is, if you were to pick pessimistic, optimistic, or neutral in terms of your view of the ecosystem, what would you say?
I say we follow the world, right? What happens in Silicon Valley filters down to us very quickly now. It's no more a 2 or 3 year lag. You see it almost immediately.
Okay.
And so people shouldn't disconnect themselves from the world. They need to see what's going on in the more mature markets, because that's going to translate. And if you look at Africa, Africa historically had a lot of foreign investors coming into the market,
Yeah.
and there's a number of aspects on the local markets that affect and are affected by global politics, which we want to stay positive about. But I mean, come on, when somebody starts talking and the markets start moving, you you gotta check whether your rand to the dollar is still palatable. And
Uh-huh.
so when you're raising in dollars, how does that impact businesses? How does that impact these founders that are spending in dollars but earning in rands, for example? It's highly volatile. And so for me, I don't want to take a pessimistic view about it. I think we are always going to go back to fundamentals. I've always been there. I'm not about the hype. I'm more about, did you actually do the right things in your business? It could still fail. I mean, nothing stops you from failing, but did you do the fundamentals? Did you cover the basics that lay the foundation for you to actually have some sort of potential into growing into a business that's going to be fundable? But you what in from a funding perspective, you are seeing a lot of diaspora coming in and wanting to put money back into the continent. I don't think it's going to be in the billions like we would have loved it to be, but they are like these little glimmers of hope.
We're seeing glimmers of
um
that. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, I think we're going to have to end it there. Keshni Morar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been
It's been
it's
a
been a
pleasure.
blast.
Thanks for joining the Big 5D podcast. This show is a production of Big 5 Digital and is written, hosted, and produced by me, Charles Laughlin, Big 5 Digital's Chief Content Officer. If you have any questions about the show, write to us at info@big5digital.org. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.